Hey, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today we are diving deep into the really chilling case of serial killer Dennis Nilsen. And we're going to try to unravel a deeply disturbing psychological puzzle. What could possibly drive someone to kill the very people they were desperate not to lose?
I mean, think about that for a second. It's such a haunting paradox, right? Most killers, they act out of rage or maybe to silence a witness. But Dennis Nilsen was different. He killed because of this desperate, pathological fear of being left alone. And to even begin to wrap our heads around how a logic that twisted could form, we've got to go back, way back, to the very beginning.
Okay, Section 1, A Killer's Strange Contradiction. To really get this, we have to look past the horrific headlines, past the crimes themselves, and into the mind of a lonely little boy where the seeds of all this violence were first planted.
Which brings us to Section 2, the only safe relationship. It turns out that pretty much Nielsen's entire psychological blueprint, his whole way of seeing the world, of relating to others, it was all shaped by one single pivotal person from his childhood.
And that person was his maternal grandfather. You see, for young Dennis, his grandfather wasn't just a person. He was everything. He was the only source of warmth in his life, the only stable figure in what was a pretty chaotic world. This was the one, and I mean the one and only secure attachment he would ever experience in his entire life. And then, when Nilsen was just 6 years old, everything changed. His grandfather, who was a fisherman, died suddenly out at sea. And just like that, the one safe anchor in his life was gone. Now, his mother, probably trying to shield him from the pain, brought him to see his grandfather's body laid out in the coffin, and she told him these words: "Grandpa is just sleeping now." But for a 6-year-old kid, that wasn't comforting. It was just deeply, deeply confusing and terrifying. The psychological fallout from this one event was just catastrophic. First, it completely blurred the line between death and sleep. But more importantly, it taught him this awful lesson. People you love, people you depend on, can just vanish without warning. This created a deep, chronic fear of abandonment, what psychologists call attachment anxiety. And chillingly, it laid the groundwork for him to later find a strange, perverse sense of comfort and permanence in a dead body. So, Section 3, Broken attachments distorted reality. That initial trauma of losing his grandfather, well, it was just the beginning. It was then compounded by an environment of profound emotional neglect, which basically made it impossible for him to form any new, healthy attachments. His home life, well, it was an emotional vacuum. His father was an alcoholic, mostly absent. His mother was cold, distant, and just completely dismissive of her kids' feelings. The lesson he learned was brutal, and it was simple. Showing emotion is pointless. Nobody is going to respond. He was completely and utterly alone. And this feeling of isolation just got worse. He was growing up in a deeply conservative society, all while trying to deal with his emerging homosexuality, which filled him with guilt and a sense that he was somehow not normal. So you have this dangerous internal conflict, right? He desperately craved connection, intimacy, but at the same time, he was absolutely terrified of the abandonment that he now believed was inevitable. So what did he do? He retreated into a world of fantasy. All right, Section 4, An insufficient explanation. Now, there's a pretty common psychological theory that on the surface might seem to explain all of this. Let's explore that for a second, because it gives us a really crucial clue. But as you'll see, it definitely doesn't tell the whole story. The theory is called mind perception. The basic idea is pretty simple. It's our ability to recognize that other people, other beings, have minds, with feelings, thoughts, intentions. So the simple argument here would be that killers like Nilsen just lack this ability. They see their victims as mere objects, not as people. Sounds plausible, doesn't it? But here's where that whole theory kind of falls apart. Dennis Nilsen had a little dog named Bleep. And by all accounts, he absolutely adored her. He clearly gave her a mind. He saw her as a companion with feelings, so he was capable of perceiving a mind in another being. Which leads us to the real question: why the dog, but not the men he brought home? And that brings us to our final section, a new relationship-based theory. So clearly that old model where he just sees people as objects, it's incomplete. There's a much more powerful theory that suggests the key isn't about the person or the object, it's about the relationship itself. And this new model completely flips the question on its head. The old theory is asking, does that thing have a mind? But the relationship-based theory says that from Nilsen's twisted perspective, the question was something totally different. For him, the question was, is this relationship safe for me? And that changes absolutely everything. This table lays it out perfectly. For Nilsen, attributing a mind to someone or something was based entirely on the level of threat. A relationship with his dog? Well, that was safe. She was subordinate to him. It wasn't threatening, so he could grant her a mind and feel secure. But a real two-way relationship with another man, that was deeply, deeply threatening. A man had his own will, his own mind. He could get up and leave. And that triggered overwhelming anxiety and fear. His horrific solution then was to create a safe connection by turning a living man into a controllable corpse, a body he could finally relate to without any fear of it ever leaving him.
So in the end, his crimes were the result of this horrific collision of four powerful psychological forces. You had this deep-seated fear of real relationships, right next to an equally powerful craving for them. Add in an overwhelming need to control the outcome of any interaction, and top it all off with that primal terror of being abandoned again, a terror born when he was just 6 years old.
And this brings us to a final, really sobering thought. Nilsen's story is obviously an extreme and horrific example, but it does point to a universal truth. Our ability to truly see the mind, the humanity in another person, it's not a given. It's forged or it's broken in the fire of our earliest attachments. And that leaves us with a critical question. If that's true, how do we protect it? How do we build a world where those first connections are strong enough to protect that fragile but absolutely essential human ability?